In the pre-dawn hours of August 21, 1942, precisely at 3:10 a.m., a contingent of approximately 200 Japanese soldiers launched a determined assault across the illuminated expanse of the sand spit at Alligator Creek, located on Guadalcanal, directly toward entrenched Marine positions. Amidst the profound darkness, American machine gunners meticulously tracked the encroaching enemy through their weapon sights. With each passing moment, the distance diminished. 20 yards, then 15, then a mere 10 yards. They drew near enough for the American defenders to discern individual faces, to hear the strained breathing of their adversaries, and to witness the Japanese soldiers preparing to hurl grenades. Every primal instinct urged the Marines to unleash a volley of fire. Established military protocols, outlined in every tactical manual, unequivocally advised engagement at the maximum possible range. Furthermore, the collective wisdom of seasoned veterans dictated that the enemy should never be permitted to close to such an alarming proximity. However, on this particular night, the Marines exhibited an extraordinary level of restraint, deliberately withholding their fire. They were consciously defying every conventional tenet of defensive warfare, a radical departure orchestrated by Major General Vandergrift, who had ingeniously reframed the impending engagement as a complex mathematical equation. A meticulously planned network of pre-registered artillery coordinates, intricately designed interlocking fields of fire, and the potent 37mm canister rounds, each meticulously packed with 122 formidable steel balls, lay poised within their respective barrels, awaiting deployment like colossal shotgun charges. The Japanese forces, buoyed by a perceived spiritual superiority and their renowned nocturnal combat prowess, harbored the conviction that they were on the verge of overwhelming yet another American defensive line. They remained blissfully unaware that they were advancing into what would prove to be the most precisely engineered killing field in the storied annals of Marine Corps history. Occasionally permitting one's adversary to draw perilously close is not an oversight. It is, in fact, a cunningly conceived stratagem, a deliberate snare. We would be immensely grateful if you would stay with us and watch the conclusion of this video. Your like and subscription would be deeply appreciated. Please also share a comment about your origin and your perspective on the topic explored in this video. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki stood with a commanding presence on the deck of the destroyer Kagero, as the vessel sliced through the inky black waters en route to Guadalcanal. His thoughts were entirely consumed by a psychological phenomenon that had become colloquially known among Japanese commanders as victory fever. This pervasive sentiment had swept through the ranks of the Imperial Army, with the ferocity of a wildfire ever since the attack on Pearl Harbor, an intoxicating, almost delusional certainty that American forces would inevitably capitulate under a sustained and resolute assault, mirroring the rapid disintegration of Chinese troops across numerous battlefields. Ichiki himself bore the significant burden of a deferred triumph. His regiment had originally been earmarked for the pivotal capture of Midway, a strategic prize that would have undeniably reinvigorated Japan's momentum in the Pacific theater. However, that crucial operation had been abruptly canceled, leaving his men with a profound hunger for the kind of spectacular victory that would unequivocally affirm Japanese military supremacy once and for all. The intelligence dispatches leading up to this point had been remarkably encouraging. Aerial reconnaissance conducted on August 12th had indicated minimal activity around the American perimeter, surrounding Henderson Field. When Ichiki's vanguard elements successfully landed near Taivu Point on August 18th, situated approximately 25 miles to the east of the primary Marine positions, his radio operators confidently relayed reassuring reports. No enemy contact, proceeding as planned. Higher headquarters had conservatively estimated the American strength on Guadalcanal at perhaps 3,000 personnel, whom they believed were widely dispersed and demoralized following their hasty disembarkation. The tactical arithmetic, from Ichiki's perspective, appeared straightforward. He commanded a formidable force of 917 elite troops from the 28th Infantry Regiment. He was convinced that a swift, decisive night attack would effortlessly overwhelm whatever token American force remained assigned to safeguard their invaluable airfield. What Ichiki, however, could not possibly have known as his men commenced their arduous march along the coastal road toward Henderson Field was that Major General Alexander Vandergrift commanded a substantially larger force, nearly 11,000 Marines, strategically deployed across the island. More critically, Vandergrift had dedicated the preceding 2 weeks to fundamentally re-envisioning and transforming American defensive doctrine in ways that would have seemed utterly inconceivable to officers steeped in traditional Marine tactics. While conventional Marine Corps manuals typically emphasized aggressive assault maneuvers and rapid troop deployment, Vandergrift was in the process of implementing something truly revolutionary: defensive warfare conceived as a meticulous exercise in precision engineering. This profound transformation had its genesis in a painstaking analysis of the local terrain. Vandergrift meticulously scrutinized the various approaches to Henderson Field, not with the conventional mindset of a military commander, but rather with the analytical rigor and methodical eye of a seasoned civil engineer. The dense jungle terrain inherently funneled any potential eastern approach toward a single, unavoidable crossing point: the mouth of Alligator Creek, where a narrow sand spit offered the sole practical fordable passage during low tide. To the north, the vast expanse of the ocean provided absolutely no natural concealment for advancing forces. To the south, the impenetrable density of the jungle rendered large unit movement virtually impossible. Consequently, any significant assault originating from the east would, by necessity, have to traverse that specific sand spit. Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Pollock, who commanded the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, had initially grappled with the radical nature of Vandergrift's defensive philosophy. Traditional Marine doctrine rigorously emphasized aggressive fire and maneuver tactics, proactive patrolling, and the imperative of engaging the enemy as far forward as possible. However, Vandergrift's strategic blueprint mandated a posture that felt almost paradoxically passive, deliberately permitting the enemy to advance to within grenade-throwing range before initiating fire. The psychological strain on individual Marines would undeniably be immense. Every ingrained instinct would scream for them to engage targets at their maximum effective range, not to patiently wait until Japanese soldiers were close enough for their faces to be clearly distinguishable. Yet as Pollock diligently surveyed the defensive positions day after day, meticulously verifying fields of fire and the precise placement of weaponry, the geometric exactitude underlying Vandergrift's concept gradually became strikingly clear. This was not a passive defense. It was a sophisticated form of mathematical warfare. The intricate defensive scheme incorporated water-cooled M1917A1 Browning machine guns, strategically positioned with meticulously planned interlocking sectors of fire. Each gun crew was rigorously trained to steadfastly hold their assigned sector, while neighboring guns were designated to provide comprehensive coverage for any potential gaps. Pre-registered mortar concentrations and carefully calibrated artillery fires from the 11th Marines, with coordinates precisely measured during daylight hours, enabled crews to dial in accurate and devastating fires even in complete darkness. Most critically, 37mm M3 anti-tank guns were loaded with M2 canister rounds. Each of these specialized shells, packed with 122 lethal steel balls, was designed to transform the narrow sand spit into an inescapable killing funnel. The level of discipline demanded from the Marines was utterly unprecedented. Marine machine gunners were typically accustomed to engaging targets at ranges of 400 to 600 yards whenever feasible. Vandergrift's audacious plan, however, called for them to hold their fire until Japanese forces were within a mere 30 yards, a proximity so close that individual enemy soldiers could conceivably hurl grenades directly into Marine positions, a proximity that would severely test the nerve of every single man. But at that specific range, the 37mm canister rounds would function with the devastating efficacy of enormous shotgun blasts, with each shell possessing the terrifying capability to cut down multiple attackers simultaneously. Private First Class Frank Pomeroy, who was manning one of the formidable water-cooled Brownings along the creek line, had spent the preceding days wrestling with the profound challenge of reconciling this new, unconventional doctrine with every principle he had ever been taught about marine warfare. The M1917A1 was capable of sustaining cyclic rates of fire ranging from 450 to 600 rounds per minute. Its innovative water jacket system, effectively preventing the barrel overheating that frequently plagued air-cooled weapons during prolonged firefights. However, firing at such extremely close range inherently meant accepting the grim reality that some enemy soldiers would inevitably manage to reach Marine positions before being completely annihilated. The entire plan hinged upon an unwavering, absolute trust in the geometric precision of the overlapping fields of fire and the overwhelming stopping power of the canister rounds. Company G, a constituent unit of the 1st Marines, was strategically assigned the crucial role of mobile reserve. Their primary directive was to swiftly engage and neutralize any Japanese incursions that might penetrate the main defensive perimeter, preventing the enemy from establishing a foothold or solidifying their gains. This particular assignment presented a unique and perhaps the most formidable psychological challenge within General Vandergrift's intricate defensive blueprint. Unlike their comrades who would experience the immediate gratification of discharging their firearms in direct combat, the Marines of Company G were compelled to maintain their vigilance in designated reserve locations. Their mission demanded an unwavering faith in the efficacy of the pre-established killing zone, requiring them to be poised for instantaneous counterattacks should any elements of the Japanese forces succeed in breaching the forward lines. This waiting game, devoid of immediate engagement, tested their resolve profoundly. As the calendar transitioned from August 20th to the dawn of August 21st, crucial intelligence dispatches relayed by diligent coast watchers definitively corroborated the westward advance of a substantial Japanese contingent along the vital coastal thoroughfare. The American Marines, meticulously entrenching themselves within their designated defensive sectors along the banks of Alligator Creek, were entirely unaware that they stood on the precipice of engaging in a groundbreaking tactical exercise. This impending engagement was destined to profoundly reconfigure and influence American defensive strategies for the duration of the Pacific War. Time twos. Their immediate understanding was simply that their commanding general had issued an unconventional directive to permit the adversary to approach with unprecedented proximity, a closeness far exceeding the parameters prescribed by any conventional Marine Corps doctrine, demanding an implicit reliance on calculated strategy and numerical precision, rather than reflexive combat instincts. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The very topography of the battleground intrinsically prescribed the lethal geometry of the impending conflict. Lieutenant Colonel Pollock had dedicated innumerable hours to an exhaustive reconnaissance of the land where Alligator Creek converged with the expansive sea. Grasping the fundamental principle that effective defensive architectural planning commenced with an astute interpretation of the natural landscape, much like deciphering an intricate blueprint. The winding creek itself functioned as an inherent geographical impediment, tracing a course generally oriented from north to south, before curving acutely eastward to discharge its waters into the vast ocean. On the western embankment, where the Marine forces had meticulously established their principal line of resistance, the elevation of the terrain subtly ascended, affording unimpeded visual surveillance and expansive firing arcs across the constricted sand spit. This spit, notably, represented the sole viable passage during periods of low tide. To the northern flank, the unobstructed expanse of the open ocean provided no viable cover or concealment for any assaulting enemy formations. Conversely, to the southern aspect, an exceedingly dense proliferation of jungle vegetation rendered it an almost impassable obstacle for the coordinated movement of substantial military units. Consequently, any significant offensive maneuver launched from the eastern direction would be inexorably funneled into a highly concentrated kill zone, measuring a mere 50 yards in width. Lieutenant Colonel Pollock had overseen the deployment of his machine gun emplacements with an almost surgical exactitude. Every single M1917A1 Browning heavy machine gun was meticulously sighted to command specific pre-assigned sectors of fire, while simultaneously ensuring an intricate overlap with adjacent weapon systems. This methodical arrangement was crucial for the complete eradication of any potential dead space, areas where enemy forces might find unmolested cover. The inherent design of these weapons, featuring water-cooled barrels, conferred a distinct advantage: the capacity to sustain the protracted and continuous suppressive fire that this novel defensive doctrine unequivocally necessitated, in stark contrast to their air-cooled counterparts, which would invariably succumb to overheating during extended periods of engagement. Each dedicated gun crew had invested days in diligently calculating precise ranges to critical topographical features. They had painstakingly marked their aiming stakes, establishing unambiguous target reference points for both day and night operations. Consequently, under the shroud of darkness, when direct visual identification of the adversary became an impossibility, the proficient machine gunners possessed the capability to precisely traverse their formidable weapons to these pre-registered positions, thereby delivering remarkably accurate and devastating barrages of fire. This precision was founded entirely upon rigorous mathematical computations, rather than relying on unreliable visual confirmation in low-light conditions. The artillery element, integrated within General Vandergrift's overarching defensive strategy, arguably constituted the most advanced and meticulously executed fire planning ever undertaken by the Marine Corps in a combat scenario. Forward observers dispatched from the 11th Marines had painstakingly pre-registered numerous concentration points along the eastern bank of Alligator Creek. This critical preparatory work involved the precise measurement of distances and compass bearings, diligently recorded during daylight hours. Subsequently, these meticulously gathered coordinates were meticulously plotted onto specialized firing charts. This intricate process enabled artillery crews, stationed several miles to the rear of the forward battle lines, to unleash highly accurate barrages of fire, even under the profound concealment of complete darkness. This innovative system fundamentally revolutionized night artillery engagements, elevating them from speculative guesswork to an exact science of precision engineering. When forward observers transmitted requests for fire upon these pre-registered concentrations, the artillery gun crews could, with unwavering confidence, simply input the pre-calculated settings and discharge their ordnance, secure in the knowledge that their rounds would impact with pinpoint accuracy precisely at the intended target locations. Among the various components of the elaborate defensive blueprint, the 37mm anti-tank guns stood out as the most ingeniously adapted and innovative element. Although primarily engineered for the express purpose of engaging and neutralizing enemy armored vehicles, these formidable weapons were being strategically repurposed and deployed in an unconventional infantry support capacity, a role that masterfully capitalized on their distinct and potent capabilities. Each M3 gun was meticulously loaded with specialized M2 canister rounds, each containing an impressive payload of 122 individual steel balls. Upon discharge, these unique rounds functioned with devastating effect, akin to colossal shotgun shells, projecting a wide, lethal cone of destruction capable of simultaneously incapacitating numerous attacking adversaries. It was precisely at close quarters, specifically within ranges of 20 to 30 yards, that these canister rounds were projected to attain their zenith of destructive effectiveness. At such distances, the individual steel balls retained their lethal velocity while simultaneously dispersing across the entire breadth of the critical sand spit crossing point, ensuring a comprehensive and devastating impact on any enemy forces attempting to traverse it. The intrinsic psychological pressures imposed by this meticulously orchestrated defensive system far surpassed the scope of what conventional Marine Corps training had adequately prepared the individual serviceman to endure. Private First Class Pomeroy and his dedicated machine gun crew, for instance, had diligently rehearsed the prescribed techniques on countless occasions. However, the stark, harrowing reality of deliberately permitting armed enemy combatants to advance to within the perilous proximity of hand grenade range fundamentally assailed and challenged every deeply ingrained survival instinct. While the formidable M117A1 machine gun was demonstrably capable of engaging targets with considerable efficacy at extensive ranges, typically between 800 to 1,000 yards under optimal environmental conditions, The directive to withhold fire until Japanese forces had closed to a mere 30 yards entailed a grim acceptance. It meant acknowledging that, inevitably, some attackers would reach positions from which they could launch grenades or even pose an immediate threat to overrun individual fighting positions before ultimately being neutralized by the concentrated defensive firepower. The paramount determinant of either triumph or catastrophic failure rested squarely upon the unwavering adherence to stringent fire discipline. Within the comprehensive defensive schema, each individual weapon system had been meticulously allocated distinct and indispensable responsibilities. The potent 30-mm guns were under strict orders to initiate engagement exclusively when the Japanese forces had penetrated the pre-established killing zone situated precisely on the sand spit. The heavy machine guns, in turn, were instructed to maintain their silence, holding their fire until the devastating canister rounds had been fully discharged. Only then were they to unleash their interlocking barrages, designed to systematically eliminate any surviving enemy combatants, endeavoring to press forward with the assault. Concurrently, artillery concentrations were strategically aimed at the eastern bank, their purpose being to decisively interdict and prevent any Japanese reinforcements from bolstering the initial waves of the offensive. The precise synchronization of these actions was absolutely critical. The timing had to be flawless. Prematurely opening fire would inadvertently grant the Japanese forces an opportunity to scatter and seek protective cover. Conversely, delaying the initiation of fire for too long carried the dire peril of the defensive positions being overrun before the intended crushing effect of the coordinated firepower could be fully realized. Company G, meticulously positioned as the designated immediate counterattack force, constituted the ultimate and decisive component within General Vandergrift's intricate defensive calculation. Should the Japanese forces, against all odds, succeed in breaching the principal line of resistance despite the overwhelming and concentrated defensive fires, Company G was tasked with launching swift and decisive counterattacks. Their objective was to instantaneously reestablish the integrity of the position before the adversary could consolidate any gains or fortify their foothold. This critical role necessitated that the reserve company maintain its readiness within concealed positions, primed for rapid deployment at a moment's notice. Moreover, it demanded an implicit faith that the primary defensive emplacements would effectively funnel any potential breakthrough into clearly predictable corridors, thereby maximizing the efficacy and impact of the subsequent counterattacks. The intricate engineering dimensions of the defensive strategy extended well beyond the mere placement of weaponry, encompassing comprehensive protocols for ammunition management and resupply. Each designated machine gun emplacement had been thoroughly provisioned with a substantial cache of ordnance, deemed entirely adequate to sustain protracted periods of intense engagement. Nevertheless, the operating crews were under strict instruction to unleash their firepower in judiciously controlled bursts, deliberately avoiding any inclination towards continuous, unceasing streams of fire. While the robust water-cooled barrels were indeed capable of enduring prolonged discharge, the judicious conservation of ammunition remained an absolutely paramount concern. Concurrently, the artillery teams had strategically pre-positioned supplementary rounds at their respective gun locations, operating under meticulously predetermined firing programs that precisely allocated specific quantities of munitions to each pre-registered target concentration. A notable limitation was the 37mm guns, which carried a restricted supply of canister ammunition, thus rendering the precise selection of targets and impeccable timing unequivocally crucial for their effective deployment. As the cloak of night descended upon August 20th, the United States Marines, diligently entrenching themselves within their fortified positions along Alligator Creek, harbored a profound understanding that they were on the precipice of field testing a defensive doctrine. This novel approach fundamentally challenged long-held, foundational assumptions concerning established Marine Corps tactical methodologies. The ultimate triumph of Major General Vandergrift's meticulously conceived plan hinged not upon displays of individual valor or audacious offensive maneuvers, but rather on an unyielding collective discipline and an almost mathematical exactitude in execution. Each Marine was compelled to place unwavering faith that their specific function, integrated within the larger geometric tapestry of the defense, would undeniably contribute to a cohesive system. This system was ingeniously crafted to transmute the brutal chaos of close-quarters combat into a precisely calculated equation. The psychological burden weighing upon these fighting men was undeniably immense, yet the underlying engineering blueprint for the defense was, by all accounts, flawless. Indeed, the abstract principles of mathematics were poised to collide with the visceral realities of warfare at an astonishingly close range of just 20 yards. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. At precisely 3:10 a.m. on the fateful morning of August 24th, the distinct sound of splashing water resonated across the narrow stretch of sand spit, signaling the commencement of an audacious assault. Approximately 200 Japanese soldiers initiated their determined advance across the mouth of Alligator Creek. Private First Class Pomeroy, his gaze intently fixed through the rear sight of his M1917A1 Browning heavy machine gun, watched with focused vigilance as shadowy figures materialized from the dense jungle foliage, embarking upon their movement across the moonlit expanse of the beach. His formidable water-cooled machine gun was fully prepared and loaded, its traverse and elevation mechanisms meticulously adjusted to sweep the preassigned sector of fire. Every primal instinct within him clamored for an immediate discharge of rounds, an urge to mercilessly cut down the encroaching enemy while they were starkly silhouetted against the pale sand and the dark waters. Yet Pomeroy resolutely withheld his fire, adhering steadfastly to the stringent discipline that Lieutenant Colonel Pollock had painstakingly ingrained into the very fiber of every Marine positioned along that critical defensive line. The Japanese soldiers advanced with an air of palpable confidence, characteristic of troops who firmly believed they were executing a flawless surprise attack. Their hushed voices carried faintly across the narrow waterway as officers whispered tactical orders, and enlisted men struggled to maintain their formations while navigating the treacherous, uneven bottom of the creek mouth. Some unfortunate individuals stumbled into deeper channels, their equipment clattering noisily as they desperately regained their footing. Others, however, moved with a smoother, more practiced fluidity, clearly identifiable as seasoned veterans of previous night operations in China, where similar stealth tactics had consistently overwhelmed Chinese defensive positions. the advancing Japanese force remained utterly oblivious to the grim reality that they were inexorably stepping into a precisely calibrated killing zone. Each deliberate stride brought them nearer to the Marines' meticulously designed mathematical defensive scheme, where intricately overlapping fields of fire were poised to converge with devastating maximum effect. The distance dwindled rapidly, 25 yards from the western bank, then 20 yards, then a mere 15 yards. The vanguard elements of the Japanese assault force were now sufficiently close for individual Marines to distinctly discern their faces illuminated by the moonlight. They were close enough to audibly perceive the labored breathing of men who genuinely believed they were on the verge of overrunning yet another American position, confident in their perceived superior spirit and refined night-fighting techniques. Finally, at a critical range of 10 yards, Lieutenant Colonel Pollock issued the decisive command, a single word that would put months of painstaking preparation and meticulous planning to the ultimate test: fire. The electrifying command reverberated along the entire defensive line in a controlled, urgent shout, instantaneously triggering the most concentrated and formidable burst of firepower the Marine Corps had ever unleashed at such an extraordinarily close range. The 37mm M3 guns were the first to roar into action, their canister rounds detonating across the narrow sand spit with the explosive force of colossal shotgun blasts. Each M2 canister shell unleashed a lethal torrent of 122 hardened steel balls in an expanding conical wave of destruction, which mercilessly swept across the entire width of the crossing point, simultaneously felling multiple attackers. The impact was both instantaneous and utterly devastating. Japanese soldiers who had been advancing in disciplined formation were suddenly scattered chaotically across the sand, their carefully built assault momentum decisively shattered by the precisely timed and overwhelming canister fire. However, the Marine defensive blueprint was only just beginning its full, terrifying unfoldment. Immediately following the expenditure of the initial rounds from the 37mm guns, the M1917A1 machine guns erupted, unleashing a torrent of interlocking fires that meticulously blanketed every single square yard of the designated killing zone. Pomeroy instinctively pressed his trigger, feeling the familiar, reassuring vibration of the water-cooled weapon cycling at its sustained, fearsome rate of 450 rounds per minute. The gun's expertly designed traverse mechanism allowed him to meticulously sweep his assigned sector, while neighboring machine gun crews seamlessly covered any potential gaps in the deadly curtain of fire. Pah! The Japanese assault, which had commenced with the disciplined confidence characteristic of elite infantry executing a proven tactical maneuver, dissolved almost instantly into utter chaos as the mathematical precision of the American defensive fires took their merciless toll. Soldiers who had miraculously survived the initial canister rounds found themselves inescapably ensnared in overlapping machine gun fires that afforded absolutely no dead space, no conceivable covered approaches, and no viable escape routes back to the relative safety of the eastern bank. The geometric perfection of Vandergrift's elaborate defensive plan was revealing its brutal efficacy in the most harrowing terms imaginable. Yet even this unprecedented, concentrated deluge of firepower could not manage to halt every single attacking soldier. Some Japanese troops, propelled forward by rigorous training and sheer desperate resolve, continued their relentless advance through the defensive fires and miraculously managed to reach the western bank of Alligator Creek. A determined few even succeeded in overrunning isolated Marine fighting positions, their flashing bayonets and hurled grenades, carving out small localized breaches in the seemingly impenetrable defensive line. For a fleeting moment, the meticulously calculated mathematical perfection of the defensive scheme appeared to be genuinely threatened by the unpredictable, volatile variables of individual human courage and the sheer randomness of survival. Crucially, this precise contingency was exactly what Vandergrift and Pollock had astutely anticipated and planned for. Company G, held strategically in reserve just behind the main defensive line, received immediate orders to launch a counterattack. The reserve Marines executed their advance with practiced efficiency and unwavering resolve, their forward movement expertly covered by the sustained, suppressing machine gun fires that effectively prevented any Japanese forces from consolidating their meager, small gains. The ensuing counterattack was both swift and decisively executed, efficiently clearing the few tenacious Japanese soldiers who had managed to reach the western bank before they could establish any meaningful foothold, or, crucially, signal their limited success to the substantial reinforcements patiently awaiting on the eastern side of the creek. The profound mathematics of defensive warfare were undeniably proving their undeniable worth in real-time combat. Yet the night's brutal action was by no means concluded. The fierce engagement was far from reaching its conclusion. As the valiant Company G meticulously restored the integrity of the primary defensive fortifications, Japanese mortar teams and their 70mm infantry guns, strategically positioned on the eastern bank, unleashed a relentless barrage of indirect fire upon the Marine encampments. The enemy commanders, starkly confronted with the catastrophic failure of their initial offensive, desperately sought to suppress the American defensive volleys, hoping to gain precious moments to orchestrate a subsequent assault. Mortar rounds descended with a terrifying shriek, detonating amidst the Marine fighting positions, their concussive blasts momentarily illuminating the battle-scarred landscape in brief, infernal flashes. These fleeting glimpses starkly revealed the grim extent of Japanese casualties, their bodies strewn across the sandy spit. The incessant incoming indirect fire severely tested the fortitude of each individual Marine, who were compelled to steadfastly hold their ground even as whistling mortar fragments rent the air overhead and 7mm shells relentlessly impacted along their meticulously prepared defensive line. Amidst the chaos, Pomeroy remained steadfast, hunched over his formidable machine gun, his gaze unwavering as he meticulously scanned his designated sector for any indication of a renewed enemy thrust. He endeavored to disregard the jarring explosions that, with each successive salvo, appeared to creep ever closer to his precarious position. The water jacket of his M1917A1, a testament to its sustained and furious operation, had grown intensely hot, yet its ingenious cooling system performed flawlessly, allowing him to maintain a continuous stream of accurate fire without succumbing to the overheating issues that frequently plagued air-cooled weaponry. The initial phase of the Battle of Alligator Creek had unequivocally showcased the devastating efficacy of Vandergrift's meticulously engineered defensive strategy. Yet a palpable understanding permeated both sides. The Marines' arduous struggle was far from its culmination. Japanese forces tenaciously retained control of the eastern bank of the creek, and their persistent indirect fires served as an ominous harbinger of preparations for additional, desperate assault attempts. The Marines had undeniably proven the viability of their defensive concept in close-quarters combat. But the ultimate, decisive test pitting mathematical warfare against entrenched, traditional offensive tactics still loomed large on the horizon. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment below about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The second wave of Japanese aggression commenced with a chilling, methodical precision, indicative of commanders who firmly believed they had gleaned crucial lessons from their initial abysmal failure. Another company-sized detachment, comprising approximately 150 determined men, began their advance across the very same constricted sand spit where their unfortunate comrades had been so brutally decimated barely an hour prior. However, instead of acknowledging the profound fundamental flaws inherent in their tactical methodology, the Japanese officers had erroneously concluded that insufficient troop numbers and inadequate coordination had been the sole architects of their defeat. They pressed forward with renewed, unwavering resolve, utterly convinced that a larger contingent, advancing in a more cohesive and disciplined formation, would inevitably overwhelm the American defensive positions through the sheer, unyielding weight of their attack. Private First Class Pomeroy, with a keen, discerning eye, observed the unfolding new assault through the sight of his machine gun. He noted how the advancing Japanese soldiers meticulously navigated around the scattered corpses of their fallen brethren, littering the sandy expanse. The enemy formation, in stark contrast to the preceding wave, appeared notably more disciplined, with officers exhibiting superior control and soldiers maintaining more coherent, organized lines. Yet, from his vantage point, behind the M1917A1, Pomeroy possessed an understanding that remained tragically inaccessible to the attacking Japanese forces. They were, in essence, marching headlong into a meticulously engineered killing zone, one that had been refined and perfected by the brutal lessons of the previous engagement. The dedicated 37mm gun crews, with swift efficiency, had reloaded their formidable weapons with fresh canister rounds. Artillery observers, with unwavering precision, had confirmed that their pre-registered concentrations remained impeccably accurate. Machine gun crews, having assimilated the harsh lessons learned from the initial assault, had meticulously adjusted their aiming stakes. Consequently, when the second wave of attackers reached the identical mathematical center point that had triggered the previous devastating slaughter, Lieutenant Colonel Pollock, with resolute conviction, once again issued the unequivocal order to fire. However, this time, the ensuing defensive fires achieved even more horrifyingly devastating results. The 37mm canister rounds, precisely aimed at the densest segment of the enemy formation, unleashed interlocking cones of destruction that mercilessly swept across the entire breadth of the sandspit. The Japanese soldiers, who had advanced with such meticulous formation discipline, were cut down en masse by a torrent of steel balls that maintained lethal velocity at the short, unforgiving range. Those few who miraculously survived the initial brutal canister fire found themselves immediately engulfed by the relentless fusillade of machine guns, whose crews had diligently utilized the brief interval between assaults to refine their target acquisition and fire distribution techniques. the mathematical precision inherent in Vandergrift's defensive concept was now revealing its most brutal and uncompromising characteristic. Each successive engagement served only to enhance the system's already terrifying effectiveness. The Marine gunners were rapidly learning to coordinate their fires with increasing deadly efficiency, meticulously eliminating the minute gaps in timing or the fleeting delays that had, during the first assault, permitted a handful of Japanese soldiers to reach the western bank. The meticulously calibrated kill zone was steadily evolving, becoming more perfectly refined with each test, transforming from a theoretical engineering marvel into a ruthlessly practiced execution of defensive warfare that afforded no quarter for individual heroics or spontaneous tactical improvisation to overcome its relentless design. As the first faint streaks of dawn began to paint the horizon, Japanese commanders, in a desperate gamble to salvage their faltering offensive, initiated a flanking maneuver that simultaneously showcased a glimmer of tactical imagination and a profound misapprehension of their dire predicament. Rather than persist in their ill-fated assaults upon the heavily fortified Sandspit crossing, they issued orders for troops to move northward along the beach, attempting to circumvent the Marine left flank by traversing the surf beyond the breakers. The underlying concept behind this maneuver demonstrated a sophisticated tactical thought process. By navigating through chest-deep water, the attacking force would ostensibly bypass the concentrated defensive fires that had proven so devastatingly lethal at the creek mouth. However, the Japanese flanking attempt served only to underscore how comprehensively Vandergrift's meticulous defensive planning had anticipated every conceivable avenue of approach. The Marines, strategically positioned on the northern extremity of their defensive line, possessed unobstructed observation and clear fields of fire that extended far into the surf zone. Japanese soldiers, struggling laboriously through chest-deep water, their weapons held precariously above their heads to keep them dry, presented ideal stationary targets for the machine gunners, who could engage them at ranges where the M19-117A1s achieved their maximum devastating accuracy. The attacking troops advanced agonizingly, slowly through the surf, utterly unable to seek cover or return effective fire, while simultaneously striving to maintain their balance against the relentless ocean swells. Artillery concentrations, which had been meticulously pre-registered for precisely this contingency, began to fall among the Japanese troops at 0400 hours, and again at 05:15. The explosive shells erupted, creating towering geysers of water and sand that only amplified the chaos engulfing men already struggling to maintain formation amidst the turbulent surf. Machine gun fires from multiple converging positions bore down upon the exposed flanking force, mercilessly cutting down soldiers who possessed no protection whatsoever, save for the water that paradoxically slowed their movement and rendered them even easier targets. This flanking attempt, which might conceivably have succeeded against a conventionally deployed defensive line, became yet another mathematical demonstration of how geometric precision, when expertly applied, could utterly neutralize even the most innovative tactical maneuvers. As the full light of day pierced the lingering shadows, Major General Vandergrift issued the command for the final, decisive phase of his meticulously crafted defensive strategy to commence. Lieutenant Colonel Creswell, S. 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, began their deliberate movement upstream, tasked with crossing Alligator Creek at a naturally dry ford situated approximately 3,000 yards inland from the intense coastal engagements. This pivotal maneuver represented the absolute pinnacle of Vandergrift as innovative engineering philosophy applied to the art of warfare. Having successfully utilized precisely calibrated defensive fires to immobilize and decimate the enemy's initial assault waves, he now unleashed a highly mobile force designed to utterly collapse the entire Japanese position through a comprehensive envelopment. Creswell, his battalion executed their crossing of the upper creek without encountering any resistance, swiftly initiating a sweeping advance down the eastern bank. Their progress was seamlessly synchronized with continuous artillery barrages, which effectively precluded any attempts by the Japanese forces to establish new defensive strongholds or organize an orderly tactical retreat. The enveloping force proceeded with unwavering methodical precision, their forward momentum expertly shielded by the very same pre-registered artillery concentrations that had provided crucial support during the defensive phase of the preceding night's battle. At a point roughly 3,000 yards inland, the Marines executed a sharp pivot toward the beach, thereby ensnaring the surviving Japanese combatants in a rapidly shrinking pocket, leaving them with no viable escape routes save for the very killing zone that had already proven so devastatingly lethal. The dramatic appearance of Marine tanks, majestically traversing the sandbar in the bright daylight, signaled the ultimate integration of Vandergrift's sophisticated combined arms doctrine. These formidable armored units, which had been prudently held in reserve throughout the night, to prevent any tragic fratricidal incidents in the pervasive darkness, now thundered across the hotly contested terrain. Their mission was to provide crucial direct fire support for the advancing infantry. Although one tank was regrettably lost to cleverly concealed Japanese mines, the remaining armor significantly augmented the mobile firepower available, enabling the engagement of opportunistic targets and facilitating the systematic eradication of entrenched enemy positions. At precisely 12:07 hours, Marine Fighter Squadron 223, a unit that had only recently arrived at Henderson Field on August 20th, achieved its inaugural interception, initiating a series of relentless strafing runs that effectively sealed off any remaining potential escape routes along the vulnerable beach. This masterful integration of air support with the ground tactical plan unequivocally demonstrated how Vandergrift's initial defensive engineering had transitioned with seamless precision into aggressive offensive operations, employing the identical mathematical exactitude that had underpinned the Marines' earlier defensive triumph. By 1700 hours, all organized Japanese resistance had irrevocably ceased, marking the complete tactical validation of the mathematical revolution in American defensive doctrine. When the last vestiges of smoke finally dissipated on the morning of August 22nd, the profound mathematical precision inherent in Vandergrift, his defensive engineering was starkly revealed in quantifiable numerical terms. These figures would undeniably redefine American tactical doctrine for the duration of the Pacific War. Between 774 and 800 Japanese soldiers lay tragically slain across the narrow sand spit and the adjoining beach areas, their bodies strewn in chilling patterns that graphically illustrated the geometric perfection achieved by the interlocking machine gun fires and the devastating effectiveness of canister rounds. A mere 15 members of Colonel Ichiki's formidable assault force were captured alive the majority of whom were wounded men rendered incapable of continuing the fight. In stark contrast to these staggering losses, American casualties amounted to between 34 and 44 killed in action, with approximately 75 wounded. The grim exchange ratio observed at the sandspit itself approached an astonishing 20 Japanese deaths for every American killed, a mathematical vindication of defensive engineering that far surpassed even Vandergrift's most optimistic projections. We invite you to stay with us and watch the conclusion of this compelling video. We would be truly grateful for your like and subscription. Please also consider leaving a comment below, sharing where you are from, and what your thoughts are on the historical topic discussed in this video. The tragic fate of Colonel Ichiki himself became a poignant symbol of the direct clash between traditional Japanese offensive doctrine and the burgeoning American defensive innovation. Numerous historical accounts reported that the regimental commander, overwhelmed by the complete annihilation of his assault force, chose to commit suicide, though some scholarly sources have suggested a degree of ambiguity surrounding the precise circumstances of his demise. What remained undeniably true, however, was that an elite Japanese officer who had previously commanded highly successful operations across the vast expanse of Asia proved utterly incapable of adapting his tactical thinking to overcome a defensive system rooted in mathematical principles rather than the conventional tenets of military heroics. The profound psychological impact of this crushing defeat would ripple throughout the Japanese command structures, fundamentally challenging long-held assumptions about American fighting capability and their unwavering defensive resolve. Private First Class Pomeroy, meticulously inspecting his M1927A1 machine gun in the immediate aftermath of the brutal engagement, noted that the weapon's water-cooled barrel remained perceptibly warm from the sustained and intense firing that had characterized the preceding night combat. The mathematical precision of the defensive fires had been validated not merely through the grim casualty statistics, but also through the flawless mechanical performance of the weapon systems themselves, which had functioned precisely as their detailed engineering specifications had predicted. The innovative water cooling system had effectively prevented any barrel overheating, despite the prolonged engagement at cyclic rates of fire that would have inevitably caused air-cooled weapons to malfunction. Furthermore, the pre-registered artillery concentrations had consistently impacted within mere yards of their intended targets throughout the entire night, unequivocally demonstrating that mathematically driven fire control could achieve a level of accuracy that individual gunners, relying solely on visual observation, could never hope to match. The far-reaching tactical implications of the Battle of Alligator Creek extended considerably beyond a mere single night's fighting. Major General Vandergrift had conclusively demonstrated that modern warfare unequivocally rewarded systematic engineering and meticulous planning over raw individual courage, that defensive positions conceived and executed with mathematical precision could achieve results that traditional military thinking had previously deemed utterly impossible. Indeed, the audacious concept of deliberately allowing enemy forces to approach within grenade range before unleashing a torrent of fire directly contradicted every established manual and training program within the Marine Corps. Yet, it was precisely this unconventional approach that had yielded the most decisive tactical victory American forces had secured since their entry into the Pacific War. Approximately 3 weeks later, the groundbreaking template so successfully established at Alligator Creek would face its ultimate and most rigorous test. A formidable force of approximately 3,000 Japanese troops, under the command of Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi, launched a coordinated full-scale assault against Marine positions on what would subsequently become famously known as Edson S. Ridge. The ensuing battle, fiercely contested between September 12th and 14th, would apply Vandergrift's foundational defensive engineering principles on a significantly larger and more complex scale. Once again, the combination of meticulously prepared positions, precisely pre-registered artillery fires, comprehensive interlocking machine gun coverage, and rigorously disciplined fire control would prove decisively effective against the relentless Japanese night attack tactics. Kawaguchi's assaulting elements would suffer between 700 and 800 killed in action, while inflicting approximately 100 American deaths, depending on the specific historical sources consulted. The crucial mathematical relationship between sophisticated defensive engineering and undeniable tactical success would steadfastly hold constant, even as the scale and intensity of the combat dramatically escalated. Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Pollock, traversing the hallowed ground where his battalion had meticulously executed Vandergrift's groundbreaking defensive paradigm, keenly understood that their recent actions transcended the confines of a singular tactical engagement. The meticulous orchestration with which overlapping fields of fire had functioned, the unerring accuracy of pre-registered artillery concentrations, and the devastating impact of canister rounds unleashed at close range collectively demonstrated a transformative truth that the intricate dynamics of warfare could, in essence, be distilled into a series of mathematical equations. This was achievable, however, only when military commanders possessed the unwavering discipline required to meticulously apply systematic engineering principles to the art of conflict. A formidable psychological hurdle, the imperative to permit armed enemy soldiers to approach perilously close within mere yards of their entrenched defensive positions, had been surmounted. This triumph was not born of spontaneous acts of individual heroism, but rather forged through rigorous training and an unshakable faith in the infallible precision of geometric planning. The far-reaching strategic ramifications emanating from this pivotal engagement were destined to profoundly mold American defensive strategies across the entire Pacific theater of operations. Subsequent island strongholds, from the blood-soaked beaches of Tarawa to the volcanic slopes of Iwo Jima, would conscientiously adopt the crucial lessons gleaned from the crucible of Alligator Creek. They would meticulously employ sophisticated mathematical fire planning and precise geometric positioning to achieve tactical outcomes that conventional defensive philosophies could never have conceived or executed. The revolutionary concept of deliberately ceding ground in exchange for absolute mathematical certainty, essentially luring enemy forces into meticulously pre-designated killing zones where defensive barrages could achieve their most destructive potency, would evolve into a standardized operational protocol for American units confronting the relentless ferocity of Japanese assault tactics. Jacob Vauza, the courageous Solomon Islander, whose invaluable intelligence had empowered the Marines to construct their elaborate defensive snare with such exacting accuracy, represented the indispensable human element that had made mathematical warfare possible. His harrowing ordeal, capture, brutal torture at the hands of Japanese forces, followed by a miraculous escape and a timely warning to American commanders, furnished the critical tactical insights indispensable for the flawless implementation of Vandergrift's defensive engineering principles at precisely the opportune moment and location. Without Vuza's detailed disclosures concerning Japanese troop strengths and their anticipated avenues of advance, the geometrically perfect marine defensive blueprint might well have been tragically squandered on an uninhabited stretch of terrain. We sincerely hope you are finding this historical account insightful. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video, as there are more profound lessons to uncover. We would be incredibly grateful for your like and subscription. Also, we invite you to share in the comments where you are from and what you think about this compelling video topic. Perhaps the most profound and enduring insight gleaned from the crucible of Alligator Creek lay in its ultimate resolution. The victory was secured because the daunting challenge of a nocturnal assault was meticulously reframed as a quantifiable numbers problem, which was then decisively resolved at an astonishingly close proximity of merely 20 yards. Traditional military wisdom had long advocated for engaging hostile forces as far forward as feasible, striking targets at the absolute maximum effective range available, thereby precluding the enemy from ever closing to distances where combat becomes truly decisive. Vandergrift's audacious and revolutionary methodology, however, deliberately contravened every established tenet of orthodox, conventional defensive doctrine. Instead, it harnessed the power of mathematical precision to fundamentally transform close-quarters engagement from a raw test of individual valor and sheer grit into a coolly calculated equation. In this novel framework, the strategic placement of geometric positioning and the flawlessly synchronized application of coordinated defensive fires became the unequivocal guarantors of tactical triumph. Thus, the nascent era of defensive engineering was inaugurated, an innovation poised to irrevocably alter the very essence and character of infantry combat for the duration of the conflict.